I am being watched. Welcome everyone to Milfuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Person of Interest, Season 2, Episode 9. It's called C.O.D. How are we on Episode 9 already? We're already like hitting the halfway point, more or less, of Season 2. The time is flying. But this one is about a cab driver in New York. Well, obviously, they're all in New York, but... You know what I mean? Yeah, you like the classic idea of the New York cab driver, right? Everywhere has taxis, but there's a specific visual of the New York cab and the drivers which inhabit them. But he's the person of interest, and there's a little tease at the start that he had kind of a collateral-esque interaction with someone who seemed to be Russian, who gave him a lot of money and told him to wait at the edge of the park, and we don't really see what happened there until later in the episode, but Finch and Reese are looking into him and trying to figure out, who he is, why anyone cares about him, if he's up to something bad, so on, so on. The usual shtick. And this is kind of a heartwarming episode, because ultimately he does turn out to be this good person who is fundamentally just trying to bring his wife and son from Cuba. He defected via playing baseball years ago, but then he got injured, so he had to stop playing, and now he's a cab driver. And the sort of seedy guy who helped him defect is charging him a lot of money to maybe bring his wife and son across, who he's probably not seen in a long time. It doesn't sound like... it sounds like it's been so long that his son doesn't even really know him, because his son's only like 7 or 8, so presumably this all happened when he was like 1 or 2 or something like that. It's a heartwarming episode because obviously by the end we get the big reunion, he makes a deal with Secret Service of all things, because they end up involved because they care about what's the MacGuffin, which is this laptop that the Russians had and the Estonian mob wanted. Was it Estonian? I think it was. I'm forgetting which European country, which Eastern European country the mob was from in this episode. It doesn't really matter, all things considered, but they're hunting for this laptop because there's something on it. The Secret Service and the US authorities really want it as well because there's something on there that's embarrassing. They never tell us what it is, and it probably doesn't matter. It's probably just kind of the MacGuffin for MacGuffin's sake. It doesn't. It's not. Maybe it'll come up someday. Who knows? But I doubt it will. It feels like it's just a thing for this episode. So he is just caught up in the middle of this because he happened to be the cab driver who was bringing this guy to a meeting, and he sold the laptop the next day. And now everyone who's come in contact with this laptop, the mob are hunting down, try to get the information, but then just killing. There's a blonde woman who's kind of the figurehead of all this, who's getting in front, and she's the one asking the questions and giving the orders to kill people when they either give whatever information they have or they aren't useful. And it's like, okay, so that's basically what the main plot of the episode is. And it's Reese following the guy around. There's a fun scene early on where Finch is just one of his customers. He just gets in his cab and talks to him and hacks into the device in the back of the car, which I've not seen one of these, but it looked like basically a card machine, so you could pay by card in the back of the taxi cab, which may be something that all New York cabs have now. I've not seen that in the back of a taxi myself, but that seemed to be what it was. But he hacks into that so that they can tap into the car, keep an eye on it, hear and see everyone who comes into the car, and there's a fun little montage early on of the various colourful characters that get into the car. But ultimately, it boils down to what you expect, which is people come after him, Reese intervenes, we get some action scenes with Reese now being his customer and telling him where to go and stuff like that. The action of this episode is decent. It's not standout by any means, but there's a couple of fun moments. Honestly, the thing I probably liked most about this episode, really, was how playful the music was. The score... It was still doing all the traditional person of interest themes, but because it focused on a character from Cuba, it was adding in all these like new versions of the theme and like adding in some instruments, like some guitar strumming, some, just sort of more Hispanic sounding music. And especially at the end when he was reunited with his family, there was kind of this very kind of sweet version of the main theme that plays. The emotional theme that always plays when something, well, emotional happens. That's its purpose. But here, it was a different flavor of it, and I really kind of like that sort of reshaping the music. I always love when movies and TV that are long running make fun changes to their themes. Like, I always want them to use their themes. It always really annoys me, actually, when a movie gets a sequel and just drops the themes from before. If it was a good score in the first movie, if like the sequel just ignores it and has a completely new score, that always bugs me, because I think music's the one thing that feels like it ties the world together, and it should always have a sort of sense of consistency to it. Obviously, you have to have new tracks as well, because you have to work the music around the specific moments, but the themes and the motifs and all those things that make up the feel of the world should still be in there. And I always like when they take those themes and they do new things with them, where you can still recognize the theme. It still feels like part of the lineage of the music, but in this case, you've got a character from a specific country, and they're sort of using that to kind of mix that in with the music. And I kind of like the idea of like different characters, maybe different persons of interest, influencing the music in different ways. Like, I don't know, maybe you have like a techie character, so you add more synth to it or something, or what, I don't know, but I always appreciate that. I think it's fun, especially when they start mixing themes together, or maybe a theme that was always like a haunting theme becomes a more sad theme, or a more emotional theme, or maybe something that was always kind of sinister becomes heroic because maybe a character has a redemption, or something like that. But the point being, I really noticed it in this episode, and I've always enjoyed the music in the show, but I don't think I've noticed it messing with its themes by doing them in a different style quite as much as this before. Maybe it has happened and I just didn't notice it, but it was really more at the front of my mind as I was watching this one. So I really like that, and I think the main guest star, I recognized the actor's face a little bit, and I was looking up what he was in. He's in a couple of Fast and the Furious movies, which I might vaguely remember him from, but I think the main thing that I know him from, the actor here, Michael Irby, he's in 6 episodes, I think it was, of The Expanse, so it's very likely that's what I'm really remembering his face from, because I like that show a lot. He's a fine addition, he's very sympathetic, maybe you can make an argument that he's almost too simple of a character, and that there's no swerves with him, he's really up to something, but for a good reason. He's very kind of exactly what he appears to. He seems like a nice guy to begin with, and he never deviates from that, really. There's nothing outside of like maybe the minor speculation that maybe he's not a good guy, but it's always pretty clear that he is. In some ways, that's actually kind of the only swerve you need. It's almost too predictable at points sometimes in TV shows, and this show itself, plays with this a lot, which is the idea that who we think is a villain at the start of the episode turns out to be a good person, and sometimes who we think is the good guy or the good woman turns out to be the villain later on. The very first episode of the show did that. So in some ways, just playing it straight with this character kind of, makes a lot of sense. It really plays with this guy who's been caught up in this bad series of events. He's got a bad situation in his personal life with trying to rescue his wife and son and raising money, but he's being extorted. There's a little moment, a little scene that I think sticks out in this episode where he goes to see a friend that he defected with, another baseball player who is successful in the baseball career. I didn't know how to phrase that, but this other guy that he defected with didn't get injured, so he kept playing, and he's actually on a major team in New York. And he goes to see this guy and asks him for some help, for some money, because he really needs to try and save his family. And the guy, I thought it was interesting that he does empty his wallet and give him all the money he's got on him, but we know that's not enough. We know that he probably needs thousands and thousands to save his family. And the guy sort of gives him this, but it also feels like he wants to just get rid of him as quickly as possible. And there's almost a little bit of a kind of a, like, he's protected now, and he's got this family that lives here. He seemed to, he has a family that he found in New York or made in New York, as opposed to some, having to bring the rest of his family with him from Cuba. And I think this little scene just, it kind of said a lot, and it's not even something that's that super important for the rest of the episode in terms of the plot, but it is just a nice little interesting character bit where even the person who once was like his equal now feels like it's left him behind. I also enjoyed the comparisons as well, or not comparisons, but at one point Finch is talking about how Cuba was basically a strict police state long before there were cameras everywhere and long before there was all these other things. It painted this interesting idea of like the analog version of what like he can do with technology now is something Cuba was always kind of doing beforehand. So these little nuggets that kind of build the larger world or the characters, I do enjoy. As far as the other character stuff, obviously we'll get to Fusco, who has his own whole separate thing this episode. Carter just kind of helps with the investigation. Doesn't really have too much of a plot here. There's a fun little moment at the start though where Finch brings up that he knows she was on a date with the other cop and asks how it went, and she just gets annoyed and hangs up the phone. And that was a fun little bit. There's always these little character beats in these episodes. I think this one probably has less super memorable ones. Like, I feel like most episodes have one or two that really make me smile or really make me kind of love how far we've come with the characters. And I wouldn't say this one has a ton of those necessarily, but it's still very pleasant in that sense. And there's some, the odd dry one-liner from Reese and the usual stuff. The Fusco side of things, though, of course, is where there's a lot more going on. And that's that HR, the leader of HR and Simmons want to reestablish the whole thing. And to do so, they basically need to get approval from Elias, because Elias is effectively, because they went against Elias last season, Elias is against them, and because of that, they can't really get anything done. So they want to form a meeting, and the major part of this is that Fusco is roped in to helping as backup when this meeting takes place. He doesn't want to do it, but Simmons has evidence on him he can blackmail him with. And ultimately, it seems like Elias's people agree that if they go and get the final mob boss that got away last season, that they'll be in bed together again and everything will be hunky-dory. But as we see, it's a trap. The mob boss knows they're coming. The cop, the corrupt cop that goes with Fusco, gets shot. And Fusco did try to back out of this. Fusco told him that he wouldn't do it. And then, of course, he reminded him of the corrupt agent that he killed last season, and scares him into doing it. And I think the important bit here is that Fusco calls Reese for help. The actual stuff with HR and everything else going on in this plot it's all fine, but the real heart of it, the real meat of it, is that Fusco actually does reach out for help. But when he calls Reese is in the middle of fighting bad guys. He's fighting the mob, protecting the cab driver. And Fusco can hear that he's busy, so even though Reese does still ask him what's going on, he hangs up and he goes on the thing anyway. It's very interesting that he calls out for help, realizes that the team is busy, and then he calls Simmons and says, okay, I'll do it. It's like he feels like he was willing to reach out and get the help, but it wasn't quite, ready to be there for him. So he felt backed into this corner and goes and does this, and it's a whole thing. But the important part is that then Reese, when they've wrapped up their plot with the cab driver, Reese calls Fusco and says, you called me, I'm calling you back, what's going on? And Fusco doesn't tell him. Fusco keeps it to himself. I think this is a very interesting sequence of events here, because we've really been playing with this idea of Fusco relying on the others and maybe Fusco not being appreciated as much. But there was that moment a couple episodes ago when Reese said, I've got your back, right? If anything goes on with Simmons and stuff, I've got your back. I'm here to help you. And he can tell that something's up, because he even says to Carter at the end, like during the whole happy ending with the cab driver, he turns to Carter and says, hey, what's going on with Fusco? And she's like, I don't know, I'll keep an eye on him. And he's like, thanks. So he's clearly is a little concerned, and he can tell something's up. And it does feel like, that when this all comes to a head and we'll see what's going on, the big cliffhanger of the episode is that because Fusco tells Simmons to piss off, basically, he's like, yeah, here's the message from the mob boss. Frankly, I don't care if HR never gets rebuilt. I'm quite happy with it being a dead thing. Simmons gets an anonymous call put into Carter, making her look into this murder of this agent. Of course, like, there's a lot of context to that murder. The main one being is that guy was corrupt and was going to kill Fusco. That's something that should probably come up when he is eventually confronted, or he's eventually confessing everything here that he's not been honest about up until this point. But it does really feel like there's a communication thing here where ultimately the lesson that needs to be learned from all this stuff is about him. He should have reached out and told them what was going on, but he didn't feel very welcomed when he tried to do that. And it's maybe something we can explore with how they do interact with each other. It's like, it feels like a solid beat to set up for time, for plots going forward. It's one of these things where this episode, I think, is a really solid little standalone episode that's kind of heartfelt. But, much like one or two that we've had in the middle of this season, it kind of feels like, okay, we're doing some sort of classical style person of interest episodes where we're building up some other things in the background. We're still bubbling things up. But there is a couple things in the back of my head where I'm like, okay, but where's Root? I want to know where Root is. What's she doing? Can we do some stuff with that, please? It's sort of like some of these things that, are starting to... And I feel like because we are getting to the middle of the season, it does kind of feel like there's probably going to be something soon. I imagine this was airing probably close to whatever the mid-season finale is. That's probably episode 10 or 11 was the mid-season finale, getting into Christmas. So I suspect there'll probably be something a bit meatier in an episode or two. But this episode is perfectly solid, and it's a very likable character they're helping. It does feel like they're sort of stepping in and doing something just genuinely good with no strings attached that they can feel happy about, and it feels reaffirming that they're doing their mission and this is what they're all about. And I think there's maybe an argument to be said, because it is just, he's a nice guy from the start. There's no questions as to whether he's a nice guy or not, or deserves help, and we get the big happy ending that arguably is almost just a bit too played straight by the end of the episode, and there was maybe not a lot of tough decisions in the main plot. Obviously, Fusco's faced with some tough decisions, and you're kind of hoping he reaches out to the others, and you're a little disappointed that he didn't. And that's obviously something that we can keep playing with and doing going forward. As a whole, I mean, I don't rate the episodes out of 10, but if I were to do it for this episode, this is a solid 7 out of 10 episode. If that makes any sense. It's perfectly good. There's some nice moments. There's some stuff going on. I didn't even mention, like, the whole wrap up to the mob thing is that this other guy's got the laptop now because he bought it from the computer store guy. The computer store guy ended up dead. Finch is able to trace the IP of the guy who's trying to sell the laptop back to this pool hall, and then that's where everyone converges and fighting ensues. And notably, the evil mob lady told them to shoot the dog. Bear was directly threatened right before Reese showed up, and that was the moment you knew that they were all going to get their absolute asses kicked. Because how dare they threaten Bear? So yeah, fine episode. Looking forward to the next one, but that is C.O.D. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. You can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications. All those things help out a bunch and help more people find the channel. And of course, you can support us over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep all the content coming. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?